Hi again. Good evening, everyone. Just few housekeeping announcements. As we approach the month of September, please just bear in mind that this month is the International Rural Women's Day, which is the 15th of October, and it is World Food Day, which is the 16th of October. And we just want to personally invite you to our documentary of the roots of resilience. So there would be three hosting countries for the documentary. That will be in St. Vincent, St. Lucia, and St. Kitts. St. Vincent will be on the 8th of August. That will be take place at the UE Global Campus. That will happen during the week of agriculture. That will happen during the week of agriculture, and I will send this message in the Ag-cademy's chat as well as this chat, so those Vincentians can register because the deadline is for tomorrow. In St. Lucia, the documentary will be screening on October the 15th, and that message will also be sent in the chat for those who want to take part. And on the 19th of October, St. Kitts and Nevis they will be screening their documentary, but you will have to speak with the project coordinator for the country, which is Latoya Duncan. So I'm now going to copy and paste that message in the chat, both chats, so persons can register if they want to take part in the screening of our documentary. And now I will pass the floor to Dr. Fletcher so he can continue his presentation. Dr. Fletcher?
Hi, good evening, everyone, and good to be back. I hope I didn't scare too many of you with the presentation on Tuesday, because Tuesday was doom and gloom, identifying all of the ways that climate change is impacting us. Today is going to be a little bit more positive. Today we're going to look at how can we adapt to the impacts of climate change. So what are some of the things that we need to do? Not that it's easy, not that it's going to be a walk in the park for us to do it, but it's possible. And I also believe in doing it, we will strengthen our agricultural sector. We will strengthen our economy. We will also have the opportunity to create a new development paradigm that is a lot more resilient if we do things the right way. So this is what we will be discussing tonight. I think it probably will run the same length as the one on Tuesday, maybe just around an hour of presentation, and then we'll have an hour for questions. So make sure that you have all of your questions so that we can go through them after we've finished the presentation. Right, so as I said, tonight we're looking at adaptation and resilience to climate change. How do we adapt? How do we become more resilient to the impacts of climate change? So just to do a quick recap of one or two of the things that we discussed last week. Freshwater systems are very vulnerable to climate change. So when we're speaking about the impacts that are relevant to you, we're really looking at impacts at two levels: impacts at the food security level and impacts at the water security level, because both of them are important to you as farmers. Water is just as important to you as, in fact, it's probably the most important thing the most important input in growing your crops. So when we're looking at the impacts, we are equally focused on water as we are on food security. You can't separate the two. So freshwater systems are very vulnerable to climate change. Climate change may reduce water availability between 10% and 20% in all CARICOM countries. So, imagine during the dry season, you have so much stress that almost all of you go through with reduced availability of water, and in some instances, no availability of water. Climate change is going to reduce that even further by between 10 and 20%. Variability in hydrological cycle will impact stream flows, aquifer recharge rates, levels of abstraction, and yields from surface and groundwater sources. Stronger hurricanes will result in greater damage to water and wastewater infrastructure. Frequent flooding and debris flows will damage water systems, and sea level rise will increase the possibility of salinization of aquifers and also soils. numerous publications have shown that Caribbean countries are among the most vulnerable small island developing states, not just vulnerable to climate change and environmental impacts, but vulnerable, period, because of the openness of our economies. You know, we are so influenced by what happens in the north, in the global north, because of the smallness of our size. So there's so many things because our economies are so dependent on one or two major sectors. So if there's any shock that impacts that sector, be it agriculture or tourism, then we see a significant impact on our economy, significant impact on your livelihood, significant impact on employment. So all of these things make us among the most vulnerable small island developing states. So what are some of the things that we can do to adapt to the impacts of climate change? So tonight I'm going to separate it into some of the things that can be done nationally and some of the things that you can do individually, because, you know, we can't just put all the burden on you and say, well, you as farmers, you need to do this, you need to do that, if we don't have a national, a coherent, sensible national plan for dealing with climate change. So the first important component is the national level adaptation actions. What are the things that need to be done at the national level to allow us to be much more resilient and to allow us to adapt to all of these impacts that I spoke about on Tuesday? Well, first of all, every single country, not just in the Caribbean, but every single country that is a member, a signatory to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and more importantly, the Paris Agreement, has to prepare something called a National Adaptation Plan. They all have to prepare these NAPs, National Adaptation Plans, that show how it is they will adapt to the varied impacts of climate change. There are two things that they have to do. One, they have to prepare something that's called an NDC, a nationally determined contribution, which shows how they will reduce their carbon footprint, reduce their emissions of greenhouse gases, even if they may not be major producers of greenhouse gases. Every single country is still obliged to produce its carbon dioxide reduction plan, if you want to put it in a simple manner, in its NDC, in its nationally determined contribution. And also in the NDC, it states what some of the things it will do to adapt to the impacts of climate change if it can get the money. But the NAP is really a focus only on adaptation. So what are the things that the developing countries, and particularly small island developing states, what are the things that they will do to adapt to the impacts of climate change? So the first thing I'm saying that needs to happen is that when these national adaptation plans are being prepared, they have to be prepared with a very strong emphasis on food security and water security. Whoever are the people in the planning unit or whichever ministry, be it environment or whatever combination of ministries that are preparing these national adaptation plans, they must ensure that these plans have a very, very strong component of food security and water security. How will we ensure that we develop food security and water security? We have to invest in our water sector and make it more resilient. I mean, that goes without saying. If climate change is going to impact the water sector in the manner that we've said it will, then we have to make that water sector more resilient. And to do that, the policies that we develop for agriculture and water have to be informed by climate change. So we can't have an agriculture policy. Our governments can't produce agriculture policies or water policies that do not speak to climate change, that do not speak to how climate change is already impacting the agriculture sector, is impacting food security, is impacting water security, and what will be done to strengthen the resilience of those two sectors to climate change. So our agriculture and water policies have to be climate informed. And if there's a water policy or an agriculture policy that the government has in place that was developed prior to the renewed emphasis on climate change, then really the government should go back and revisit that policy and ensure that it is informed by the climate science, by the information that we have on how climate change will impact agriculture and how climate change will impact water policy. Another thing that's very important is that the government has to develop the capacity to accurately assess its water resources, including basin water budgets and supply-demand balances. What I mean by that is, in an earlier life, I was St. Lucia's Minister of Responsibility for Water. And you would think that if you're responsible for something, then you should know what it is that you're managing. So if you're responsible for your household, then you know what resources are at your disposal in your household. You know how much money is coming in. If with your farm, you know what acreage you have, you know how many what sort of planting you did, when did you plant, what sort of production you expect. Well, most of our ministers with responsibility for water, most of our water utilities do not know what is the capacity, the productive capacity of their water resources. They cannot tell you how much water is being produced by the various watersheds, which really is a little scary because it means you're managing something and you are not keeping track of how much of it is being produced, whether that production is changing, and what are the things that are impacting that production. So you can't really look at the impacts of climate change on water if you're not assessing how it is that water resource, the totality of that water resource, is changing over a period of time. And where you have watersheds, what is the production of those various watersheds? And how are you managing supply with demand? So if it is that, okay, we know our watersheds produce on average, let's say 75 million gallons of water during the month. And we know that the extraction by agriculture, by domestic, by cruise ships, by whatever, is 50 million gallons. Then we know, okay, we have a surplus during that period. And are we storing that surplus? What is happening? How much of that surplus has to continue going through the river? Because you can't drain everything out of the water course. You must leave your rivers must remain healthy for ecosystems and river integrity, etc. We don't have that information. So we have to be able to develop that capacity to accurately assess what is that resource we're managing and what is the difference between supply and demand at various points during the year. I would guarantee you that if you speak to your respective ministries and your respective utility companies, they will tell you that they don't really know what that information is. We also have to develop and adopt something that is called integrated water resource management, where you look at water and the management of water as a totality, not just the watershed, not just the water that is being treated by the utility company, but everything that goes with that water, the biological ecosystem in which it's located, the forests that are producing it, everything. I mean, it has to be an integrated water resource management plan that manages every single element of that resource. And that integrated water resource management plan has to incorporate social and gender equity, because not everybody has access to that resource. You'll find that depending on where you live, depending on your economic means, depending on so many other factors, you may not have equal access to that resource. So we have to ensure that when we develop that integrated water resource management plan, that there's social equity and that there's gender equity. Water is life, and water is something that everybody has a right to. And it should not matter where you were born, how you were born, how much money is in your bank account, whether you're male or female, and none of these things should matter. Everybody should have access, should have equal access to water. So that integrated water resource management plan has to ensure social and gender equity. It has to ensure economic efficiency, and it has to ensure ecological sustainability. And what we mean by ecological sustainability is that we cannot extract more water from that resource than is required for the maintenance of the integrity of the ecosystem. If you are farming, for example, and you dam the river that is passing through your land to the point where there is no water that is flowing downstream, then it means that you are now impacting all of the ecosystems that are downstream, including anybody who's downstream and who's expecting to get water off that river. So that's something that's ecologically unsustainable. We have to ensure that whatever water is abstracted from the watercourse is done in a manner and at a volume that would not cause that resource to now diminish to the point where it's no longer viable. You've now dried up a river because your farm is using up so much water that there's no water that's flowing after that. That's not practical. Even if you visited countries where you have reservoirs and dams, you will see that there is always that capacity for the water to continue flowing into the river. The dam will not take all the water and have the river dry downstream. You must ensure that water course remains healthy. So that's what we speak about. When we speak about ecological sustainability, that's what we're speaking about. We have to address, if we're talking about adapting to the impacts of climate change, we have to address the problem of non-revenue water. Now, non-revenue water might be something that is new to some of you. Non-revenue water is the water that the utility company is producing and putting out in its distribution system, but is not getting paid for it. Why? Because you have infrastructure that is old, you have pipes that are old, so you have a lot of leaks along those pipes. So for some countries, my country in particular, St. Lucia, non-revenue water is as high as 55%. That means for every 100 gallons of water that the water company, the water and sewage company, WASCO, produces and puts on its system, 55 gallons of those 100 gallons are not accounted for. They lost through wastage, or not so much through theft, because I don't think we have a big theft problem in St. Lucia in particular, but they lost through wastage. They lost through pipes that are not working properly, inefficient distribution systems. So if these countries could reduce the levels of non-revenue water, so St. Lucia, for example, if it could bring its non-revenue water levels down from 55%, let's say to 30%. I'm not even talking about bringing it down to 10 or 15. Let's say it brings it down to 30% or 25%. It cuts the amount almost by half. That is a significant volume of water that is now available to everyone in the country. So not by doing anything, not by increasing the storage capacity, not by any amount of reforestation so that you could make your watersheds healthy and more productive, just by cutting down on wastage, the amount of water that will be available to everyone increases significantly, and in some cases will actually double. So that is something that every country should be focusing its attention on, because you will find in every country there is a serious problem of non-revenue water. Make the most efficient use of water resources to adapt to climate-related water scarcity. If you are to look at our water resource as a budget, as a balance sheet, sorry, you will see that for most countries, there's some exceptions. So Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis might be exceptions because the rainfall, the precipitation levels on those islands, particularly in recent years as a result of climate change, has not been great. But in most of the other countries, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dominica in particular, St. Lucia, Grenada, we have more rainfall falling on our islands than we are using water. So it means that our balance sheet, the amount of water we can be capturing and the amount of water we are using, there's an imbalance. There's a lot more water that is falling on the island. Precipitation levels are a lot greater than our abstraction, than what we're using, be it for agriculture, for commercial purposes, or for residential purposes. So if we can store more of that water, then we would be in a much better position during the dry season. If it is that our utility companies and our governments, where these utility companies are owned and operated by governments, were able to increase their storage capacity, it means that during the dry season, there is water that is in storage. It's like your bank account. You have savings. So at times when you may be out of a job or you need money for something else, you need to dip into your savings so that your savings will tide you through. Well, we don't have savings where our water capacity is concerned. What we have is almost a bounce and draw situation. Yes, you do have, I don't know how many of you are familiar outside of St. Lucia, the concept of bounce and draw, but it means you work today and you collect your money the very same day and you spend it. So there's no delayed gratification. I work, I get paid, I spend my money. That's bounce and draw. That's almost what we have with our water system. We don't have sufficient storage capacity to last us for an extended period of time. So once we get into the dry season and we go a few days without rainfall, or our watersheds start drying up, then we find that we do not have enough storage to tide us through. So one of the very important things that the government has to do to adapt to the impacts of climate change, because these droughts are getting longer and more severe, is to increase water storage capacity. That's extremely important. Very closely connected to that is improving water storage and conservation at the individual level, and we'll come to that later on when I speak about what are some of the individual things you could do. But the government needs to provide incentives for you to do that. So it should make it easier for you to buy water storage tanks by removing import duties or whatever other tariffs are there on water tanks to encourage you to buy water tanks. Or maybe giving you an incentive, a tax incentive, because you see, it is to the government's benefit and it is to the benefit of the utility company the more water you store. Because if you are storing more water, it means that during the dry season, you are better able to take care of yourself. And you don't have to be calling the radio station, calling the talk shows, calling the utility company after 2 days without water because you no longer have water. If it is that you have enough water stored so that in the event there's no water coming into your area for, let's say, a week, 2 weeks, but you have enough water based on the size of your household and the rate at which you use it for both your personal use and also for your farm, then you're good. You know that it's only when it gets so, okay, it's been 2.5 weeks now, I haven't gotten any water, I have a problem. But if it is that after 3 days, 4 days of no water coming through your pipe, you have a problem, then you will be putting pressure on the government and on the utility company. On the water utility company. So the more government can encourage you to store water so that you relieve the pressure on them, the better it is. So that's why government should be providing incentives to make it easier for you to store water. And also for you to do something which is very dear to my heart. I've not been able to do it at my home yet, but it's something that, you know, I haven't been able to do it fully. But it's the whole concept of dual plumbing. And dual plumbing means that the water that you capture from your roof, the rainwater that you capture, you use that for the non-potable requirements at your home, and you use the domestic water supply, the municipal water supply, for all of the potable uses. It grieves me that I am doing it, and almost every other person in St. Lucia, and I'm sure in St. Kitts and Nevis and in St. Vincent is doing it. Your water company has water that it collects at the watersheds, at the water sources. That water is pumped to a treatment plant. Very often pumped using electricity. In some cases, you have gravity fed, but in other instances, you probably might have to pump it against a gradient. So you have to use electricity to pump it to a treatment facility. When that water gets to a treatment facility, they do all sorts of things with it to remove the silt, to remove all of the suspended solids, to treat it, to make it drinkable, so that in the event that there are any bacteria in there, E. coli or whatever, because there might have been animals grazing close to the watershed or whatever. So a significant amount of money and manpower are used to make that water potable, to make it drinkable. That water is then fed to your home, not everywhere via gravity, because you don't have treatment plants operating on the highest point of the island and being able to feed everything via gravity. So you have to use a combination of electricity and gravity to get it to every single one of our individual homes. What do we do when it gets to our home? We promptly flush that water down the toilet. Because when we use the toilet, that's the water we're using. We're flushing that water down the toilet. Now, when you have a lot of water and you don't have water scarcity, that's not something you pay attention to. But in a situation like now, where we are seeing reduced production of water, every single gallon of water that you do not use for every single gallon of potable water that you do not use for that purpose is water that you're wasting. So dual plumbing would allow you to use rainwater for all of the non-potable needs in your household. So things like irrigating your garden, washing your vehicle, flushing your toilet. You should not be using the water that you're paying quite a bit of money for from your water utility company for those purposes. And again, that is something that governments can encourage by saying, okay, people who do dual plumbing, they will give them a tax rebate. These are some of the creative ways in which government can make it profitable and make it attractive for people to engage in activities that help us adapt to the impacts of climate change. For those countries where there is groundwater, so this is actually a well in Anguilla, where people are depending on groundwater. I think Antigua used to be that way, although I think Antigua may have gone completely desal now. But where you have groundwater and people are now abstracting water from those groundwater sources at a rate faster than it's being replenished, you have to implement some sort of aquifer management program to ensure that you do not take out water faster than that water is being replenished. I mean, there are very many impacts of that, including the possibility of subsidence, that because you don't have that water providing that foundation for the land, and when you start taking out water, it is very possible that land can now start subsiding. But more than that people just don't have the water that they need to have access to. Where you have a situation with salinization, where you have saltwater intrusion, then maybe putting barriers to prevent the saltwater from getting in. These are some of the things that government can do with aquifer management programs to protect the integrity of the groundwater sources as an adaptation measure. I think I may have spoken about this last on Tuesday, but for our research institutions, CADI in particular, but also our tertiary level institutions, our community colleges, there's no reason that they shouldn't be doing this type of work. Conducting research into drought and heat-resistant varieties. The kind of heat we have now, the kind of variability of water supply we have right now, means that some of the seeds, some of the varieties that you would normally plant will not do well. They will struggle, you will not get high yields, they will wilt, the amount of water they need, you're not able to supply. So we need to see how can we plant drought and heat-resistant varieties that will give us the same yield and hopefully the same quality of produce that we've been accustomed to. That sort of research is necessary because we're living in a totally different era now, and we're not going to go back to that old era, not for a while, not in your lifetime and my lifetime. So we now have to prepare, okay, how do we ensure that the seeds that we're planting will give us varieties that are more tolerant to heat and more tolerant to drought. Promote sustainable land management. That's extremely important. We have to manage that land resource on which we're growing our crops, and unless you're doing aquaponics or hydroponics, then that land is as important a resource to you as the water that you're feeding into it. So things like conservation tillage, ensuring that we disturb the soil as little as possible, because we know the more we disturb soil is the more fragile and more vulnerable we make that soil. So practicing conservation tillage, practicing agroforestry. So we plant windbreaks. We also, with the other thing with agroforestry is that it creates a microclimate that is a lot cooler than if you're planting in a wide open field with no canopy, with no trees. So agroforestry is another example of sustainable land management as an adaptation measure to climate change. Mulching, extremely important, particularly these days with the type of heat that we're experiencing. If we can keep that water in the soil, and we can do that by mulching so that the surface area of the soil that is exposed to that very serious heat, that very serious radiation is reduced, then your crop will be that much better because you are keeping water in the soil. What you want to do is to keep as much of that water during those dry periods in the soil as possible. Clearly, when you have a lot of rain, you don't want to keep water in the soil because you don't want water logging. But during the dry period, as much of that water as you can keep in the soil, the better for you. So mulching is extremely important when you can do it. Integrated pest management, very, very important. I said on Tuesday that with these warmer temperatures, with these changing climates, you will have increased incidence of pests and diseases. So how do we engage in integrated pest management? Which means not going around crazily spraying everything because you see aphids or you see caterpillars. No, how do we use biological means? You know, how do we use bacillus, for example, to treat caterpillars in cabbage? How do we, in some instances, use soap and water? How do we ensure that the place where we are farming is not conducive to the growth of or to an infestation of pests and diseases? Maybe we can plant, there's some plants that we can put down, marigold or neem, that would serve as deterrents to those pests. So how do we use integrated pest management in a way that does not increase our cost and does not make it more challenging for us to produce that crop? And I know you want to see that beetle get off your screen, so I will get it off now. how do you ensure that you protect your arable land? This is something that really, really grieves me, because this is my country. This is St. Lucia. This is what happens when you don't have a land use plan. So we've seen in St. Lucia the total area of agricultural holdings, the acreage that is under farm in St. Lucia, go down from 87,375 acres in 1961 to, in 2007, the last time we did an agricultural census, 30,204. 17 years later, in 2024, I would be shocked if that figure is above 20,000 acres. So we've seen a 75% reduction in the total area of agricultural holdings in St. Lucia. And I'm sure it is not dissimilar in many other countries. You cannot talk about food security if you are not securing the land on which you are growing your crops. So a proper land use plan to ensure that we protect our arable land is extremely, extremely important. And it is not something that we have paid sufficient attention to our detriment. Planning production according to the best suited agroecological zones. It's something that we've spoken about. I remember when I was permanent secretary in the Ministry of Agriculture, it's something that we try to do. It's difficult because it requires discipline. It requires orienting production in such a way that it is planned. But if we can't even have a land use plan, we certainly are not going to have production according to the best suited agroecological zones. But what this really says is that because of climate change, because of changing weather patterns, because of differences in fertility of soils, that there are some crops that are better suited for some areas than others. So we should plant where we will get the maximum output, the maximum yield, or at least encourage people to plant crops where they will get the maximum output and the maximum yield. Now, that's not to say that if you have your farm holding and you want to do vegetables, and it just so happens that the government says that that area is not best suited for vegetables, and you should not do vegetables. But it's to give you some level of guidance on what are the best crops suited for that area, and to encourage people through incentives to plant according to the suitability of the agroecological zone in which they find themselves. Let's move to livestock, because farming and food security is not just about crops, it's also about livestock. We have to provide support for livestock resilience. Sometimes we forget that these animals are also out there in that hot sun 24/7 and having to deal with temperatures that they are not used to at all. So how do we provide support for livestock resilience? We have to improve our pasture management, ensuring that there is always pasture for our ruminants to feed on. And where the pastures have dried up because we're in the middle of the dry season, ensuring that we make pasture available to them, either by storing during the rainy season that we had, or by shifting them around so that there is always pasture available to our ruminants. Providing livestock shelter and water facilities, if you are capable of providing shelter for your livestock, but most importantly, providing water facilities. These animals need to be kept hydrated, and especially in this heat, the same way we need to be hydrating more often, they also need to be kept hydrated. So we have to ensure that we prepare adequate water, we provide adequate water facilities for our livestock within an area where they can get to it, not at one end of the farm and the poor cow has to walk a mile for it to get to water. We have to ensure that there is water available for our livestock, be they small ruminants like goats and sheep, or cows or pigs. We have to make much better use of data for decision making. It is something that we do not do enough of in our region. Everybody believes that because our country is small, we know what's going on, so we don't need data. That is not true. We need data. We need to analyze the data to give us an indication of what is going on. And if we are making an intervention, is that intervention successful? Are we seeing the results that we should be seeing? Otherwise, we could be throwing money away, trying to solve a problem and finding that problem, we're not doing anything there. So collecting, analyzing, and using data. And that is also very important if we are trying to get money from a lot of these financial instruments, climate financial instruments that are out there. So things like the Green Climate Fund that we hear so much about. The Green Climate Fund will only give government money for a project if the government is able to show that the problem it is trying to solve has been caused by climate change. So you cannot go to the Green Climate Fund and say that in Deriso, Miko, in St. Lucia, the amount of the rainfall levels have dropped significantly, so we don't have as much rainfall as we had before. So we need to be able to put a dam on the Trumase River so that we can service that entire area. So we need somewhere in the vicinity of $40 million to do that. What the Green Climate Fund is going to say to you is, how do you know that the problem you're trying to solve has been caused by climate change? What data do you have to show that over the last 20 or 30 years that the precipitation levels, the rainfall levels in that area have reduced? What data do you have to show that stream flow rates in the Trumase River, which is what you're looking to dam, have reduced significantly, again, because of climate change? If you cannot show that, then they will not give you the money. But you can't show that if you don't have data. So data is extremely important, not just for us for decision-making, not just for government for decision-making, and for you to make decisions on your farm, within your household, but also for us to be able to access funding to solve the problems that we're looking to solve. Without data, you cannot get the money. I can't go to the Green Climate Fund and write a proposal and say, my grandfather used to be able to dive in that river before. Now when I walk in the river, the water is only up to my ankles. That's climate change. I need money. They couldn't care less what my grandfather used to do in that river. Unless I can show them the data that show very clearly how that the whole physical basis of that river has changed over the last 20 to 30 years as a result of climate change, you're not going to get the money. So investing in climate and hydrological monitoring systems is something that's extremely important, and government needs to do that. It needs to collect that data so it can show on a very granular basis, on a community by community level, on a watershed basis, what is happening in the country and why we need to take action, and also to give it the information so it knows what type of action to take. It can take that action before the problem blows up in its face. Very often we only deal with problems after they've blown up in our faces. When we collect data, we can analyze trends and we can see how something is heading long before it becomes a problem. So that's extremely important. Undertake risk assessment and planning. We have to see just how much of a risk something is. So something may look like it's a big problem, but it may not be as big a problem as something else. So with limited resources, you have to decide, where do you put your resources? Where do you put your money? Who's at risk more? Which area is at risk more? Which sector is more at risk? So risk assessment and planning and deciding how you deal with those risks is extremely important. And again, it's not something that we're doing enough of, but it's something that if we were to engage in, we would be able to get the resources to do, because right across the board, all of our development partners, all of the partners we deal with, the World Bank, even the bilaterals that we deal with, the European Union, they all say to us that you need more data. We do not have enough data from you. You need to be able to do your risk assessment in a much better manner. So there's funding. It's just a matter for us to make this a priority. Doing hazard mapping and vulnerability assessments for agricultural areas. Identifying which areas are most at risk from flooding. Yes, we have anecdotal information. Yes, we know that, okay, when we have heavy rainfall in St. Lucia, for example, the area in Mark and Bexar floods very quickly. We know that. We know that from experience. We know that from, what has happened over the last few years. But we should be able, again, with the use of science, with the use of the instruments that are available, do very precise hazard vulnerability assessments for all agricultural areas so that we know this is what will impact you. If you have a certain amount of rainfall, if you have more than 2 inches of rainfall in a particular period, you will have flooding in this area. So the people who live in these areas, the people who earn their livelihoods in these areas will know what to look out for. If they hear that there's a storm coming that is likely to drop a significant amount of rainfall, then they know what to expect. We're still going about things as if we're living in a period where we did not have data, we did not have the capacity with computers to to analyze that data, and it baffles me why we continue to live in the dark ages when we're not in the dark ages. So undertaking hazard mapping and vulnerability assessments for agricultural areas is extremely important to help us to be able to adapt. Finance, to be able to finance adaptation and resilience, there is a lot of money out there. Granted, sometimes it's difficult to get access to it because there's a lot of bureaucracy, but we have to invest resources and develop capacity in project preparation and management. All of our governments, all of our prime ministers speak very eloquently and very passionately and very, very convincingly when they go to meetings, particularly climate change meetings, about the absence of sufficient funding to tackle climate change. And they're right. If you have to look at the enormity of the problem, there is not enough money available to deal with the problem. But guess what? If the same people they're complaining to were to say to them, but Prime Minister, where are the projects? It's not like you've submitted 15 projects to me and I've not funded them. You haven't submitted any projects to me and you're complaining about money. The best way to complain about money is to show me that you are using the money, to show me that you have projects to use the money, and you still need more money. But to just come to me and complain that you need more money, but I haven't seen any evidence of the problem that you are looking to address, or that we've given you money and you've used all of it already, then why are we having this conversation? Fortunately, that has not been said, at least not publicly, to any of our prime ministers, but it is something that they keep setting themselves up for. We have to invest resources and develop capacity for project preparation and management. We have to be able to flood those, the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environment Facility, the Adaptation Fund, all of those. And now they're setting up a loss and damage fund. Every single one of our countries should have at least 15 projects in front of each of these institutions, because I can very easily identify 15 problems that we need to solve, be it in food security, water security, improving our infrastructure, you name it. There are problems that need to be solved, but we have not quantified those problems and we have not turned them into bankable projects that we can submit. So that is something that has to be done. We need to use nature-based solutions, reforestation, coastal zone management, conservation and restoration of mangroves. Not every problem needs a hard solution. In some instances, just by going back to nature and using nature-based solutions, we can deal with the problem. And that is something that I think we have to pay particular attention to. So you have erosion along a riverbank, you plant trees along that riverbank, and you don't allow people to cut those trees down. And even better, you plant trees that have some kind of economic value. So you plant mangoes. You plant mangoes, people can harvest the mangoes. So there's a reason for keeping them there. So these are some of the things that we can do as an adaptation response to climate change. Provide support and incentives for the formation of organized farmer groups. The more we organize people into groups, the better, because there is strength in numbers. It's much easier for government to be able to provide support to a farmer organization, to a farmer group, than it is to individual people. So government should be encouraging people and providing incentives for the formation of organized farmer groups, and maybe even devoting resources to it. It was something that I was very often looking to see how we could do. Can we devote an extension officer to work exclusively with a farmer group, instead of that extension officer being at large, and at the end of the day, you don't know what the extension officer has done. But if we can assign an extension officer to work with a farmer group, or if we can assign somebody to do the paperwork for the farmer group, to do the accounts for the farmer group, to manage the administration of that farmer group, then it relieves the burden on you as a farmer and a producer from doing these mundane things. So when in providing support and incentives for the formation of organized farmer groups, it's not just providing money, but it's also providing technical support so that your farmer group can focus on production, and you have support for extension, for technical, whatever technical support you need, and for bookkeeping. Encourage research and education institutions to study the impacts of climate change on food and water security in the Caribbean. That is something that we need to do more of. Again, Ag-cademy, our university, our tertiary institutions, tell us what we need to do. That's, that's free labor. I think somebody's mic is open. Right. So yeah, that the students in our universities, that's what they're there for. They are doing research. So make sure that research is research that is relevant to us, relevant to you. So encourage research and education institutions to study those impacts and to come up with solutions for us. Conduct public education campaigns. People need to be educated. People need to understand what it is they're up against. Because if you're informed, if you're educated, you could make better decisions, and it will stop you from making bad decisions. So again, this is something that I would like to see governments do a lot more of: public education campaigns, and by people who know how to communicate. Not technocrats who are going to come and speak to you in a language that you do not understand, and you leave there saying, okay, what was that? People who can explain things to you in a manner that you understand, people who can field questions, can take questions and answer those questions so that you understand there's much greater clarity. This is the biggest problem facing the Caribbean, climate change. But we're treating it as if it's not. The resources that we've put into educating people these resources do not match the gravity of the problem that we're experiencing. We have to ensure that our extension and other sector officials understand the implications and the consequences of this new climate change. A lot of our extension officers do not understand this problem. A lot of our extension officers are still working on an old paradigm, an old model, and they cannot give you the type of advice that you need. So the government, the ministries of agriculture, have to spend time re-educating their extension officers and right through the value chain, from the permanent secretary down, so that they understand how climate change is impacting the agriculture sector and what needs to be done. Because if they don't understand, then they cannot make adequate representation on your behalf to the Prime Minister or to the development partners. And this is something, again, I don't think we've paid sufficient attention to. How do we ensure that our extension officers understand this new dynamic? We have to find better ways of sharing resources and knowledge. People have information that resides in their head or resides in a filing cabinet. How do we make sure that that information gets out there to the people who need it? How do we ensure that you know what is going on? And after you've found out, be it from this Helen's Daughters Academy or whatever else, that you now understand it is your responsibility to share that knowledge with somebody else, somebody who was not able to attend this training program. You are now in a better position to explain these things to them. And if there are things that you don't understand, then come back to us. Go back to Helen's Daughters and say, look, Mr. Fletcher, Jimmy, Dr. Fletcher, whatever you want to call me, said something at this. I didn't really catch all of it. Can you explain to me exactly what it is? Because I don't think I understand it clearly enough. So that you now, because you don't know how well you understand something until you've tried to teach it to somebody else. That's when you know how well you understand something. So sharing that knowledge also helps you reinforce your own understanding of something. So please, whatever you get, whatever I give to you, whatever you get from this academy, share it freely with others, because that is the only way we will ensure that we have a more informed workforce, a more informed farmer group that can make better decisions. We have to climate-proof our infrastructure, ensure that it's waterproof as much as possible, windproof with the construction of windbreaks, natural windbreaks, and sunproof. If you have to put sheds so that your workers can get a respite from the sun, can go in for a few minutes, get a break, get some shade, and go back out. That's extremely important. Government also has to build public infrastructure to higher levels of resilience, because if they don't, then it's going to impact your farm. So, and that's a responsibility that government has, to ensure that public infrastructure is built to a higher level of resilience. So the farm roads that you're driving along, that they can withstand the greater flooding that you're seeing now, that the culverts can allow water to pass through. These are things that are extremely important as we adapt. Strengthen disaster risk reduction capacity. Very important. How do we reduce the risk from those disasters? How do we ensure that we have risk transfer mechanisms? Insurance, crop insurance is very important. It's what makes it very difficult for banks to give you loans, because as far as the bank is concerned, there is no means of mitigating that risk. So yes, I give you a loan to invest in your farm, and then a hurricane passes. It could be Beryl, it could be Jonathan, or there's severe flooding, or there's strong wind, and that crop is lost. What then? I can't use your crop as collateral because your crop is more fragile than anything else. So how do we ensure that we insure? I know the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility is looking at introducing a parametric insurance for the agricultural sector so that they don't need to come and do an assessment on your farm. That once it has been determined that a storm passed and the storm passed a particular threshold, then you will get an automatic payout. That's what happens in all of the countries. In all of the countries, St. Lucia, whichever country that is paying into the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, once there's a hurricane and they've identified a hurricane or a storm, and they've identified that it has passed a particular threshold, then there's an automatic payout. There's no valuation person that has to come and inspect your property and determine what type of damage you've experienced. We need to have that for the agricultural sector. But we need to have it not just for storms and flooding, but we need to have it for droughts, because droughts are as devastating to you as anything else. So how do we ensure that we protect you and that we have those risk transfer mechanisms? Early warning systems, extremely important, so that we can provide people with early with warning, with caution, so that they know, okay, this is likely, this is coming, there's a weather system coming in, this is what we're seeing from all of the data, all of the radars, this is what is going to happen. So therefore, you need to do certain things. You need to evacuate. You need to take your livestock to higher ground. You need to, if you could harvest, if there's a crop that you could harvest now, as opposed to waiting for 2 days, then do it now, because when those winds pass, you will have no more tomatoes on your tree. There'll be no crops left. So that type of information, that type of early warning is extremely important, at least to help you salvage certain elements of your livelihood. We have to promote youth and gender in adaptation measures. Very often, these decisions are made by men who do not understand the unique vulnerabilities of women and young people. So we have to ensure, government has to ensure that the unique vulnerabilities of women in particular are taken into account. When there's a hurricane, when the hurricane passes, the burden of getting that household back on track is almost solely the woman's. The burden of ensuring that there's water and trekking whatever distance to go and get water to ensure that food is cooked, clothes are washed, and all of the things that we take for granted, that's the woman's responsibility, in addition to whatever other duties that woman has to her job, on her farm. So there are unique vulnerabilities that women and youth go through, and I do not believe that those vulnerabilities have been factored in, and that we have not seen the policies reflect those vulnerabilities. And we certainly are not seeing enough women and young people in decision-making processes related to climate resilience. There are still too many men making decisions, and too many men making decisions that are not reflecting the wide range of vulnerabilities that men, women, children face. And that is something that has to be addressed. Emergency funds for recovery and support, very important. How do we ensure that now I know some governments do that very well. They're able to do a payout, but that is something that has to be looked at, because increasingly that will be a problem. Increasingly, we are going to be impacted by more and more of these extreme weather events. So we have to ensure that there's some kind of contingency. There's some sort of emergency fund to be able to help people bounce back as quickly as possible. We spoke about that on Tuesday, and I think one or two of you said that Helen's daughters did an awesome job after the passage of Hurricane Beryl in providing this, but psychological first aid after extreme weather events is very, very, very important. We don't pay sufficient attention to the trauma that some people have experienced, and then how much they need to de-stress and decompress and share those experiences, so that these things do not boil up and cause even greater problems for them later on. Provide assistance, subsidies, and in-kind support to restore livelihoods, be those planting material, tools, because your tools may have been washed away or damaged. All of these things have to be looked at, and whatever subsidies we can provide. Ensure better collaboration of regional organizations. We have a lot of organizations that are doing work, but in many instances, they're not collaborating, they're not talking to each other, they're not all working towards a common purpose. So you have CARICOM, you have CARDI, you have Caribbean Public Health Agency that deals with water quality and public health. You have the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association. Are all of these organizations talking to each other and ensuring that when they provide support, you have CDMA, Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Authority, that when they provide support, they are providing the right support. You know, that is something, again, that needs to be better addressed. Coordinating support from development partners. How do we ensure that ICA, FAO, USAID, IFAD, World Bank, DFID from the British, that their support is not duplicating. Each development partner is doing something that is filling a void, because very often they come and they cherry pick. They want to do the sexy things. They want to do the things that will give them the biggest visibility. It is government's role to ensure that it identifies what it wants from each of these development partners and says to ICA what it wants from ICA, as opposed to what it wants from FAO, as opposed to what it wants from IFAD. You know, and again, that is not something that we're doing enough of. We just dancing to the beat of the drum of the development partner, as opposed to telling the development partner, this is what we want from you. So this is, again, the kind of shift in mentality that has to take place as we prepare for a whole different world. Improving preparedness planning, identifying vulnerable communities and groups, and ensuring that we can get support to them as quickly as possible. One of the things I found when I worked in Dominica after Hurricane Maria, let's look at a simple thing, like somebody who is on dialysis because they have kidney failure, or somebody who is diabetic and they have to be taking insulin every day, sometimes twice a day, to keep their blood sugar in check. A hurricane passes and the road to that particular household, it could be a farmer, it could be one of you, that road is impassable because there might have been landslides, or there might have been trees that have fallen and blocked up the road. You're living in a remote area, so that road is not passable anymore. That person, there's somebody there in a house who needs to be dialyzed 3 times a week. That person cannot get to a hospital. You know what's going to happen to that person? If they can't get to a hospital for a week or longer, they will die. So, but do we have an inventory of who these people are, who these vulnerable people are? The person who's taking insulin, that insulin has to be refrigerated. If that insulin stays out at room temperature for too long, it then becomes useless. So it doesn't matter how many times you inject it into your thigh, it will not have any impact whatsoever. But there was a power cut. The lines down in that area are down. So there is no power going to that area. Are we aware that there are people, that there might be 2 or 3 people in that area who depend on insulin for the regulation of their blood sugar, and that we need to get power restored to that area as quickly as possible? Because while these people did not die from the hurricane, they may die from the conditions that exist after the hurricane. So, you know, preparedness planning, and that is not just on an individual basis. These are farmers. That's you and me. These are things that, particularly as we get older, these are some of the things that we have to deal with. So have these things been identified so that government can ensure that it provides an emergency response to the people who need that response? For the agricultural sector, the fishing sector, is there an emergency response plan for the agricultural sector and for the fishing sector, so that the ministry goes into automatic overdrive once a hurricane hits? It knows what it has to do. Or is it that people are still fumbling, still trying to figure out what they do? That we shouldn't be at that stage now. We should be at the stage where we know automatically this has happened. We know how we need to respond. We know where we need to respond. Post-event activities, developing capacity to undertake damage and loss assessment, so we can very quickly identify what is the quantum of the damage that we have experienced, so we can go to the development partners and say, this is the money that we need. It shouldn't take us five weeks to do a damage and loss assessment. We should be able to quantify that loss very quickly and say, okay, this is the support we need. The quicker we can do that, the quicker we can get resources to you, so that you can restore your lives and your livelihoods. Document all lessons learned. Again, I find that every year we have a hurricane that passes and damages a country. It could be 2017 Dominica and the BVI. This year, the Grenadines and PT Martinique and Carriacou. Have any of the countries that were not impacted spoken to the people who were impacted to find out, okay, what were some of the things that you experienced? What are some of the things that I should do to ensure that what you went through, that I don't go through it? We don't do that. Every year, somebody goes through a hurricane, those experiences stay with them. Nobody tries to share that information so that we have a repository of information on what to do when a hurricane strikes, or what to prevent that hurricane from causing the kind of damage that it caused back then. We're not documenting our lessons learned. So every one of us every year has to learn those lessons all over again for the first time, unless it is that unfortunately this is the second time you were hit by a hurricane. I don't understand this. So sharing experiences regionally and within the wider community of small island developing states is something that our government should be doing. So quickly, what can you do at the farm and organizational level? Well, the good thing is most of these things that I spoke about earlier at the national level also translate very well to the farm and organizational level. So engaging in climate smart agriculture, conserving and managing water on your farm, important. Practicing soil conservation on your farm, important. Diversifying your crop production so that there's something that you could fall back on if possible. That's extremely important. Utilizing integrated pest management at the farm level so that you could deal with those infestations, or you could even prevent the infestations from taking place because you have a farm where you've cleared all of the rubbish. You have conditions that are not friendly for pests and disease to develop. That's very important. Practicing agroforestry at the national level, just as important for you to do, setting up windbreaks when possible. On-farm water management, micro-irrigation systems, and water recycling. Can you recycle water? Can you reuse water so that on your crops that maybe are not the food crops? So can you reuse water, or you have water coming from a sink, soapy water coming from a sink? Can you direct it in an area where it would not cause, where you want grass to grow, or you want or there's a particular crop, it could be a mango tree or mango pasture that you have enough. You have enough, not pasture, sorry, mango orchard that you have where you have enough water that you could reuse and allow that water to be put to a productive use. Making use of rainwater harvesting, as much of that rainwater as you can capture. As I said, what goes for the national also goes for the local. Investing in adequate water storage, as many water tanks as you can put down. That's very important. That's actually in my backyard. That's 3 1,000-gallon water tanks that I've recently put down, in addition to another 4,000 gallons of rainwater storage there. So right now I have 7,000 gallons of rainwater storage. I'm trying to increase that to 10,000 because it just situation is getting worse. Installing sustainable irrigation and water management systems, drip irrigation, so you could get that water where it is needed, when it is needed, without wasting it. Eliminating water wastage on your farm where you see leaks, then dealing with that as quickly as possible so that you're not wasting water. And the bad thing about wasting water is that you're paying for water, the water that you're wasting, unless you're taking it out from a river. And even if you're taking it out from a river, you're still paying for it because you're using a pump and electricity or diesel to pump it up. So eliminating water wastage on your farm where you see it is extremely important. Diversifying your income. Can you do agrotourism? Can you do value-added agro-processing? Can you also do some fish farming or aquaculture so that you diversify your income base? One area that I think is extremely important for us to look at is the nutraceutical sector. If you go, like me, whenever I'm in the US, I shop at Whole Foods quite a bit. And you go to the shelves of Whole Foods and you see all of the things that we take for granted. Turmeric, ginger, bitter melon, all of these things packaged and selling for a lot of money. Things that are growing wild in our islands, and things that don't need a lot of water, things that don't need a lot of husbandry, things that don't need a lot of attention. Our university should be working with us and with you to see how we can develop industries from that. So, again, if you send Lucian, you'll recognize things that we call Gupopo, Tabak Jab, Gwenaba Fay, Veven Lachiwat, those are the Creole names. And we have indigenous pharmacopoeia that when we fall ill, we know that these things are what we take in a tea or something else to help us recover. There is a potential to convert that into products that will sell for a lot of money at Holland and Barrett in the UK and Whole Foods in the US. All it takes is some work by our universities to do the research and to now cause an investor within us, not a foreign investor. If we have to use a foreign investor, fine. But if we have enough local money and enough interest in the diaspora that we can be the ones doing that, and we can produce high value commodities that are less water intensive and will increase your farm income. So these are some of the things, we have to think outside the box, and these are some of the things that we can do. Engage in climate smart agriculture, extremely important. Use innovative and more water efficient production systems. We're seeing a lot of that taking place now. This is actually a production system that the National Council of People with Disabilities in St. Lucia has set up in the south of the island, where they are growing lettuce and some pretty good quality lettuce using water from some tilapia that they are farming on that premise. So again, this costs a little bit more money, but it's because of the setup that they have there. We can adapt that. We can do it ourselves. So if you don't have a lot of land and you want to be water efficient, these are some of the things that we can do. And the good thing about this is that young people are attracted to this. Young people are not attracted to being out in the field with a shovel, with a spade, digging up the land. But something like this, you could get them interested in. Increase the resilience of farm infrastructure, so proper drainage on your farm, so it can handle stormwater better. Contour farming, raised beds. These are all things that we can do to increase the resilience of our farm infrastructure, so it can deal with deluge, it can deal with flooding a lot better. Join community-based organizations. This is my favorite community-based organization, Helen's Daughters. I mean, the work you people are doing is tremendous. And the more you can organize yourselves and the more you could do things together, I think it will just redound to your benefit, because in unity there's strength. And Helen's Daughters really stands as a beacon for what can be done with proper coordination and with people who are committed to a shared purpose, a common purpose. Accessing and using climate information systems to help you make informed decisions. And again, maybe that is something that Helen's Daughters can look at doing in conjunction with the Ministry of Agriculture, finding a way to make that information available to you so that you know what it is, what are the best crop varieties to plant, planting dates, where to plant, better preparing for extreme weather. That will help you mitigate your risks. So how do you access and use climate information systems? That is something that the government should be making available to you, and that is something that you should be asking for. Participating in risk reduction and transfer mechanisms. If there are no insurance programs to enroll in, make noise, ask for them. Use savings and credit schemes to build financial resilience. Save as much as possible, because at some point you will need to dip into that savings to bounce back. And to bounce back immediately. Well, you don't want to be waiting for 3 or 4 or 5 months for government to give you something. You use your own funds, and when government gives it to you, you replenish it. So how do we ensure that we have credit schemes? Can our credit unions help us put something like that together? Can Helen's Daughters work with a credit union to put up a credit scheme that will help your farmers build up their reserves, so whenever there's an extreme weather event and they need to bounce back quickly, that money is available. We can work with the credit unions to see what can be done and how that can attract some interest so that your money is earning for you. Most importantly, find your voice. Advocate and lobby. You are extremely powerful. You are extremely influential, but you are not powerful and influential if you stay quiet. And I'm not talking about advocating and lobbying because in a political way, because we know, unfortunately, in all of our countries, politics is toxic. That if you start speaking, people are going to start branding you. No, you speak on the things that matter to you, and you speak collectively. You speak as a group, and you cannot identify whether this person is red, yellow, green, because we're all speaking as one. We're speaking about the things that affect us and the things that we want support for and we want assistance with. You have to find your voice, and you have to use your voice. Be brave. Speak up. If you don't speak up, nobody's going to speak for you. Demand a meeting with your minister. Tell your minister what it is that you want, but go to your minister with solutions, not just with problems. Tell him what it is that you want done, to address the problem. It could be Alfred Prosper in St. Lucia, or Saboto Caesar in St. Vincent. Tell them what it is that you want done, what kind of support you need. Use that voice. Encourage your friends to take up kitchen gardening and peri-urban agriculture. This is me and my little farm. The name of my farm is EIEIO. I'm sure you know what EIEIO means. But yeah, as many people as possible who could take up kitchen gardening and peri-urban agriculture, the better food security we have. So the burden shouldn't just be on you. All of us should see this as our responsibility. Food security is our responsibility. It's not the responsibility of just Helen's daughters or some farmer cooperative. Everybody must see this as their responsibility. We speak about climate change. It's not climate change. It's a climate crisis. We're in the middle of a full-blown climate crisis. And it is not just a serious threat. It is an existential threat. It's a life and death threat to the Caribbean, and particularly to food security and water security. And we have to understand that and treat it that way. These are paintings by Jonathan Gladding, a St. Lucian painter. The one on the right we actually used when we were negotiating the Paris Agreement as our poster to highlight how grave this situation is. Ladies and gentlemen, or primarily ladies, time is running out. We have to do something, but we need to advocate. We need to understand what it is we're dealing with, and we need to advocate for what it is that we want. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Fletcher. We will start with some questions that are in the chat. So the first question is from Indira. She's asking if a desalination plant a benefit, or would it end up causing a more harmful impact on the climate?
Okay, so a desal plant works by using energy to desalinate, remove the salt from water so that you have water that is drinkable. There are two issues with a desalination plant, two negatives with a desalination plant. The first one is that it is using electricity to cause the desalination to take place. Now, in all of our countries, the cost of electricity is high. So in St. Lucia, the cost of electricity is pretty close to $1 per kilowatt hour. So it means that desalination as a means of producing water is expensive, more expensive than groundwater extraction or surface water extraction. The other problem with desalination is that after you've taken all the potable water, you're left with brine. You're left with a very salty mush that you now have to put back into the ocean. And if you do not do this properly, then that brine, can end up causing problems to your marine ecosystem. So there are two issues that you have to deal with. Now, having said that, it's not that desalination is bad, because in some of our countries, to be honest, we have no choice but to go desalination. In St. Kitts and Nevis, Antigua and Barbuda, you have no choice but to go desalination. In St. Lucia, increasingly, during the dry season, we will have to go desalination to augment our water supplies, because we just are not getting enough water. What we have to do is to find a way to minimize those two issues that I spoke of. The first one you could minimize by reducing on the amount of electricity you need from the grid, by maybe pairing the desalination plant with a solar PV facility. So a lot of the energy that you need for desalination, if you could get it from solar panels so that you reduce on the amount of electricity you're using, then that will reduce the cost of producing the water. Then a brine treatment solution. There's a gentleman in St. Lucia by the name of Carlos Noel. He has a company together with his wife called Invictus. And he has found a way to treat that brine so that when that brine is released back out into the ocean, it is not as toxic and not as harmful to fish life as possible. These are some of the things that we have to look at, or maybe get that brine out as far as possible so it's not harming your near shore, so that when you put it out, it's able to be diluted, and you're not putting it anywhere close to your near shore marine ecosystem. So desalination is it has its drawbacks. It has its things that you have to look at, but you have to weigh that with what the problem is. Seawater polluted, I don't think really. It depends on where you're pulling it out, where you're pulling the water from. If you're pulling if you're doing the desalination from an area where you think you may have fecal contamination, for example, that you may have a hotel, or you may have something that is discharging coliform material into that water, then clearly you don't want to be extracting water from there. But it's a wide open ocean. So the first thing that you have to do is to make sure that where you're extracting that seawater, that the input, that water, is of a decent enough quality. But when that water is taken in, the desalination also treats the water. So it's not just that you remove the salt and then you put it out. There's treatment, there's chemical treatment that also takes place in that water to be able to neutralize the same way you do with water that's coming from let's say Wasco or anybody else, though Wasco is taking water from a water source, it treats that water to be able to remove any harmful chemicals and any harmful contaminants. The same thing is done with desalination, but you want as much as possible to be extracting that seawater from an area where the quality of the seawater is good. You're welcome.
Thank you. The next question is, what is the reason for goats refusing to drink water most of the time?
That I do not know. You'll have to speak to a livestock specialist on that one. That I don't have that type of experience with livestock to be able to tell you how goats behave when it comes to drinking. I have no idea. Sorry.
Okay, and the last question that is placed in the chat is from Maureen. As a former PS, what legacy have you left with regards to food scarcity and climate change? And what are your visions for the future?
As a former I stopped being the PS in the Ministry of Agriculture in 2003. It's 21 years ago. There are many things that we did back then. You know, the IRDCs, the inland reception and distribution centers that you see around the place. We did that to modernize the handling and processing of produce. Unfortunately, they haven't been used in the manner that we had envisaged because they were supposed to be used for proper packaging and sorting of fruit. We also put in place irrigation facilities in Cul-de-sac and Roseau. I don't know how much these irrigation facilities are being used right now. Oh gosh, it's been a while. You've sent me back down memory lane on some of the things that we did in the agricultural sector, agriculture and fisheries sector back then. The fads, many of the fads that you see being used in the fishery sector, the fish aggregating devices, we put them down in that time. The fish landing facilities in Vieux-Fort and Soufrière and Choiseul were all built during my time as PS Agriculture. So there are a lot of things that we did, but going back to, I think, the more substantive question, which is my vision for food security, there are a lot of things that we need to do. First of all, we need to protect that land resource. You saw the graphic that I put up. I mean, you can't have food security if you're not going to protect the land on which that food is going to be grown. You can't have food security by bringing in 40-foot containers from Miami. So the first thing we need to do is to protect that land resource. We need to have in place a proper land use plan and policies for how that land is going to be used. We also have to ensure that agriculture is something that is at least profitable for our farmers. Farmers will not go into agriculture if there's no profit in it for them. Fortunately, we have a big tourism industry that uses a lot of agricultural produce. Unfortunately, that agricultural produce, most of it is coming in from Miami in 40-foot containers. So we need to have a targeted matching of demand with production. Now, there was a time when, again, during my time as permanent secretary, there was a gentleman by the name of Eustace Vitalis. Many of us know him as Chinese, who came out of the Ministry of Agriculture. He was a planning officer in the Ministry of Agriculture. And he went to work with Sandals. And his job with Sandals was actually very aggressively finding where produce existed and causing Sandals to buy that produce. I think that's the most produce Sandals has ever purchased from farmers, not just in St. Lucia, but across the Windward Islands, because he very aggressively went out and got farmers producing everything, broccoli, bell peppers, you name it, and really good produce. You need that. You can't passively expect production to match demand. So there has to be a very aggressive marketing on the part of the Ministry of Agriculture, providing that market intelligence and ensuring that you can match demand with production. The government also has to find a way to deal with something which is really a stress for farmers, and it's not good. And that's a long period that hotels in particular take to pay farmers. You can't take 90 days to pay a farmer and expect that farmer will be profitable or will want to remain in the industry. It means that the farmers, you're holding the farmers' money. That money is not productive. So the government has to find a way. And one of the things that we had spoken about was, again, maybe using the marketing board, so that the marketing board would be that go-between between the farmer and the hotels. So the hotels would purchase from the marketing board. The farmers would come and sell their produce to the marketing board, and the marketing board would pay the farmers within a week for that produce, because the marketing board would have a line of credit that it could use to pay the farmers. And then the marketing board would then negotiate very hard with the hotels to ensure that it was paid within a reasonable period of time. You see, the marketing board can deal with, if it's government backed, it can deal with maybe a 60-day period for payment. And the farmer cannot. So the marketing board, acting as that go-between, ensuring that the hotels got quality produce, but ensuring that the farmer was paid on time, is something that I think we were looking at as one of the solutions. And also the marketing board functioning as the exporter of produce under a St. Lucia brand, so that we consolidate produce from farmers, we consolidate eggplant or whatever, we find where the markets exist. And we're not talking about markets in the United States. We're talking about markets in the Northern Islands, so markets in the Bahamas, in the BVI, in the places that have big tourism industries but don't have production of their own, that we can sell produce to them. Definitely nutraceuticals, I think, is a big area to go. The thing with nutraceuticals is that they're not costly to produce, and the return on that investment is huge. So getting our universities to do the research and to be able to produce these little capsules of verveine, these capsules of chapaté and tabac jab and guenabafé, and putting that out there in a manner that is safe. And I think those are opportunities that exist. The other thing that we have to do is reduce the cost of electricity, because a big input for our farmers, if they want to do value added, is electricity. But a farmer cannot afford to pay $1 per kilowatt hour to convert fruit into jams, jellies, and juices. That electricity has to be much cheaper. So we need to find a way to give incentives to farmers so that they can invest in solar panels to reduce their prices, or maybe incorporate that into some sort of plan where government makes that available and that money is recovered over a period of time. Particularly if the farmer is selling to the marketing board, that money can be recovered. So these are some of the things that need to happen. I think there's a lot of potential in the agricultural sector, because food security is so important to all of us. We must eat. But the problem is the people who are making money off food right now is the supermarkets. It's Massy. It's the people in the middle. The farmers are not making money. Why is that? Because we are not providing the farmers with the level of support that they need, and the supermarkets are making their money from the importation of produce. We have to find a way to cause more local produce to get onto those supermarket shelves. And the other thing that we have to do is to learn from the experience of bananas. We were able to penetrate and keep a market in the UK because we were producing as 4 islands. We were not producing as 1 island. We have to do the same thing. We have to consolidate. And those islands that may have certain advantages. So, for example, I know Grenada is very big on soursop production. So how do we cause Grenada to be a leader on soursop, not just soursop fruit, the commodity, but soursop juices, and the other countries that have so we can penetrate the Waitrose and the Tesco's, etc. One thing that was a big blow to us, and I lament it every day, was the loss of Windfresh. We really should never have allowed Windfresh to go under, because Windfresh, quite apart from the bananas that it was marketing, and the banana sector had gone down, and the problem was that we kept flogging that dead horse that was the export of bananas to the UK. That horse was dying. And instead of seeing, okay, how can we diversify and cause Windfresh, which had a presence in the UK market, which had a direct relationship with Tesco's, Marks and Spencer, Waitrose, Asda, all of those supermarkets, which had a large ripening facility and a fruit handling facility that we could have used to send our produce and then put it out there. We allowed that to go down, a presence in the UK market. And even the land that Windfresh, that Stansted facility was on, was so valuable. And it was very short-sighted work on the part of our governments to allow Windfresh to collapse, because I think Windfresh gave us that avenue into the UK market that we've now lost completely. But quite apart from that, I think there are opportunities within the Northern Caribbean that we need to exploit.
Our next question is, where can we find the information and updates about government leads, project initiatives regarding tackling climate change? And why isn't there more being done to encourage recycling of waste that emits gas that contribute to global warming?
So that second question now is above my pay grade. It used to be within my pay grade before, but I'm no longer in government. So unfortunately, I can't respond to why government is not doing more. Your guess is as good as mine. It's something that should happen, must happen. Maybe it's a resource problem. Maybe they just don't have enough people to devote to that work. But it's so important that I think they have to find a way to devote resources to it. Recycling. We can't continue filling up landfills with waste, because our countries are all small countries. And in St. Lucia, for example, when the Deglo landfill is decommissioned, as it will have to be, I think sometime within the next 5 years, we don't have many places in St. Lucia that are jumping up and saying, yeah, you could use me as a landfill. And the same holds for every single Caribbean island. So we really should be working towards a zero landfill policy and recycling, reusing as much as possible. Why that's not being done, your guess is as good as mine. As the first question, where can you get information? I would think that the Department of Sustainable Development, or the department that has responsibility for climate change in your respective countries, and your Ministry of Agriculture. Those should be the places where you get information on what are the policies, what are the plans that government has in place in those areas. I don't know. There might be some that's available online, so you could probably find a national adaptation plan. You should be able to find a national adaptation plan of all of our countries online. I know you certainly can find a NDC, the Nationally Determined Contribution, but that document is a little bit of a read. So you want something that is distilled in a manner that you don't have to be reading through things that speak about gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalents and all of these things. You want something that's stated very simply. And to be honest, I don't know whether that exists. But if it doesn't, speak to your minister, speak to your permanent secretary, speak to your extension officer. As a collective, as Helen's Daughters, you have strength in numbers. Seek them out and say to them that this is information that our members are asking for. Can you provide it to us? If it's already in an aggregated form, fine. But if you have it in a disaggregated form, it's better than having, if you have it in a raw data form, it's better than having nothing. If you have it in PowerPoint form, give it to us. Whatever you have that you can share with us, please do. I think that's the way to address it. Do it as Helen's Daughters as opposed to individual farmers, unless you're a farmer that has a very good relationship with somebody in the ministry or with the minister, then fine. But if not, do it as Helen's Daughters.
All right, thank you. Are there any more questions? If you do have a question, you can raise your hand and just speak, because I'm only seeing one hand raised. So you can go ahead.
Good evening. Hope everyone is well. I just wanted to thank Dr. Fletcher for his presentations. You put a lot into perspective how important it is to combat this climate crisis. It really does start with our individual selves, just being more mindful and aware of how our daily habits impact our environments. We all have a responsibility to protect this earth. So again, I thank you for all the valuable information and motivation. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm seeing another hand raised, so you can go ahead and speak.
I think that's you, Robertina. I think your hand is raised. Unless you're speaking and you're muted.
Hello, good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Oh, thank you very much. Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Fletcher, for a wonderful presentation, extremely informative, and had me thinking in all kinds of directions to see how we can actually contribute as individuals to make sure that we are actually a positive part of sustainable agriculture and assisting in trying to minimize or limit the encroachment of climate change and the impact on us. One thing you said that had me really thinking was in terms of insurance for farmers. I'm not hearing anybody talking about farmers beginning this process or even looking at how can they self-insure. I realize that farmers, although maybe because they don't make so much money, they tend to get the money and spend it. But how should we go about trying to let farmers know that, hey, there's something called self-insurance and how to go about trying to protect themselves instead of depending on um, companies that are not going to insure us? They feel that we are too high risk. That's one question. And another one, in terms of risk management, what are your views on methods of risk management that farmers themselves can take on to improve their odds of not being always victims to the weather as it happens in a cycle? We just expect it. So how can we plan to make it better for ourselves?
Okay, great questions. On the question of insurance, this is something the farmers that I've spoken to in St. Lucia when I was in the Ministry of Agriculture, who told me that they don't need any insurance, that they set aside their money and that they're able to bounce back when they need to. I can tell you one of them. He used to say this to me repeatedly. That's Mr. Christopher Cox. Whenever I would speak to Christopher, he would tell me that he's able to bounce back, that he sets aside. But Christopher Cox is a unique farmer. I mean, if you're looking for somebody who has been ahead of his time from day one, it's Christopher Cox. Not everybody is, and I remember I was always to say to Christopher, not everybody is like you. But self-insurance is important, but we should not have to self-insure. I mean, one of the things that loss and damage, the first thing that, I spoke about loss and damage on Tuesday. Loss and damage has focused on is insurance, providing insurance mechanisms. I think what needs to happen is that the government needs to look at what are the insurance needs of the farming community, because farmers are very vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. I mean, farmers have always been vulnerable to extreme weather events, and now climate change is making this even worse. So it's very easy to make a case for insurance for the farming sector. I'd much prefer parametric insurance like you have with CRIF, so that once the damage passes a certain level, the payout is automatic. You don't have people coming to your farm and wanting to know how many trees you've lost, what's the quantum of the crop that you think you've lost. No, just an automatic payout once it has reached a certain level. And I think that can be done, but it needs a champion. It needs somebody who is going to say, okay, you know what? We will get CRIF, the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, the Ministry of Sustainable Development that has responsibility for, that has oversight of climate change, the Ministry of Planning, that is the national entity that deals with accessing climate finance, and bring those three together and say, let's make a case to access money from the Green Climate Fund or from the Loss and Damage Fund for insurance for the farming community in St. Lucia. In fact, not just in St. Lucia. Let's come up with a program. Let's do it as a multi-country program so that we can have a bigger pool. The same way you used to have Windcrop before, where Windcrop provided a crop insurance for the banana industry. Let's see how we can have a regional insurance, because the more people you have contributing to an insurance, the better. If you only have 5 people contributing to an insurance, you're not going to get much money. But if you can now pool insurance from St. Vincent, St. Kitts, Dominica, Grenada, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Lucia, together with an initial capitalization by the Green Climate Fund, I think it is very, very possible for you to have a well-capitalized insurance facility that can be managed by CRIF. So you speak to Mr. Isaac Anthony, who is the chief executive of CRIF, who understands those issues, who comes from a finance background. I think that's something that can be done, but it just needs some willpower. It needs somebody to say, okay, you know what? We are going to make this happen. Because it's difficult for a farmer, particularly a farmer farming at the level that most of you are farming, to be able to generate the type of reserves that you will be able to put aside for literally a rainy day. The damage that you're going to experience, your greenhouse being blown away, it's difficult for you to be able to pool enough resources to make that happen. I think you need some level of capitalization on that. That's not to say that if you are able to save money and put it aside, that you should not. Absolutely do it. But that will not be sustainable. You get a hit this year from a hurricane, you deal with a drought next year where you've lost all of your vegetables, then it's very easy to see how that money can be depleted very, very quickly. So I think we need to find a way to develop a proper insurance facility for farmers. We've been talking about this for the longest while. Now, I believe with the climate finance funds, it is possible. Somebody just has to make this a priority. Risk mitigation, I spoke of some of the things that that we can do. Improve the conditions on your farm. So improve your resilience. So if you're in an area where you've suffered from flooding before, ensure that your drains, that you have proper farm drains and that your drains are clear. Where you could plant windbreaks so that you can, if there's heavy wind, that wind will not impact your crop directly, then plant those windbreaks and plant windbreaks with crops that you can use. So not just ornamentals. When I say ornamentals, I mean things that will not give you any production, but plant windbreaks with crops that tree crops that you can use afterwards. Things like that you can do. Diversify your production as much as possible. When I lived in Dominica after the passage of Hurricane Maria, it was actually a culture shock for me. Landing at Douglas Charles Airport and seeing there was not one coconut tree that had any branches on it in Dominica. They were just sticks standing up along the landscape. And I mean, Dominica is one of the most beautiful, greenest islands you can ever experience. And to go there and see Dominica looking like this was something else. I lived in Dominica for 6 months. I couldn't get avocados, couldn't get tree crops, couldn't get citrus, couldn't get mangoes, couldn't get coconuts. But you know what I was getting a lot of? Root and tubers. There were a lot of root and tubers in Dominica because the root and tuber crops were not impacted by Hurricane Maria. Interestingly, the people who were selling the root and tuber crops in Dominica at the market in Roseau were the Haitians, because there were a lot of Haitians that had moved to Dominica and a lot of Haitians who had got involved in farming in Dominica. So when you went to the market, you would get a surplus of dasheen and yam. So again, diversifying your production so that you don't depend only on one thing. So you have some income going. So when something is down, if you've lost your mangoes, or you've lost your citrus, or you've lost your vegetables, then you have root crops that you could depend on. So these are some of the things that you could do to mitigate your risk. Spread those risks out.
Thank you very much. I really do appreciate your answers. Just on another note, when you indicated that this gentleman, Eustace, when he was with Sandals, he was able to bring together the farmers and have them produce the foods, the vegetables that the hotel would need. What came to mind was, what exactly is the government's policy on this? What do they, in terms of how they work with the hotels, do they say, okay, you bring in 5 tons of tomatoes every year, bring in 5 this year, and we're going to have our farmers to produce that 5? How do they do it? Or is this something that they actually collaborate, that the farmers are aware, this year, next year, we are producing sweet peppers for the hotels, and each individual farmer can say, well, okay, I'm going to be producing 2,000 pounds or 500 pounds. How is that done? Or is there even that level of coordination to make sure that it's seamless, so that the hotels don't feel that we only imported five tons and the farmers are not meeting the other 5 as we agreed to? What exactly is the collaboration?
I'm not sure what collaboration exists now, but there's a mechanism that will allow it to take place, because the hotels, if they're bringing in fresh produce into the country, they need a permit to bring in fresh produce into the country. You can't bring in fresh produce without a permit from the crop protection unit of the Ministry of Agriculture. If you bring in whatever, it doesn't matter. Once it's fresh produce, you need to have a phytosanitary certificate that says that produce that you bring in is free of all diseases. Also, there's certain products that they would not allow you to bring in if it poses a risk. So, for example, I know there are flowers that they would not allow you to bring into St. Lucia, things like heliconias and gingers, because they were closely related to the banana. And if you brought these things in and they had a pest or a disease that we did not have in St. Lucia, then that could find its way into our banana industry and cause damage. So the crop protection unit does those assessments, and every time an importer wants to bring things in, be it Trans-Caribbean or whoever is bringing the produce in, they need to get permission from the ministry, and those products have to be inspected. So, saying all of this to tell you that if it is that the ministry knows that we have farmers with 10,000 pounds of cabbage in the ground, and a request is made to bring in 8,000 pounds of cabbage, then the ministry should be able to say, okay, you know what? We know that there are 10,000 pounds of cabbage in the ground that will be harvestable within another week, because our extension officers in the various regions, that intelligence has come back to us. That is the role of the extension officer. The role of the extension officer is not just to help you solve a problem, but also to report back to the ministry on what is there. Now, that function, I do not believe, has been kept throughout the years. So I don't know how much intelligence the extension officers are bringing back to the ministry on what production there is on the ground. But if extension is working properly, extension should be saying to the ministry that we have X pounds of tomato from the farmers who are farming along the Marquis River and the farmers who are in Bellevue or wherever, that we know that there's a certain amount of tomato that will be harvestable within a particular period. Now, you also need to know whether these farmers have contracts with somebody. So if a farmer, not because there's production, that production is available to you. So that farmer can tell you, okay, I have 10,000, I have 500 pounds of tomato that will be available, but 300 pounds is already committed. But I will, because I have a contract with somebody to supply them with tomatoes. I may have a contract with Barron Foods because they're using it to do tomato ketchup. I don't know. But I have 200 pounds that's available. So, and again, these days, you could put that information into a database online, and that information is collected for you instantaneously. So the ministry should be able to get an age range of what kind of production is on the ground and how much production is available, so that you can make a decision. If somebody is applying for a permit to bring something in, you could say to them, but we have farmers who already have that there. So why don't you go and talk to these farmers? And that is what Vitalis was doing. Vitalis coming out of the Ministry of Agriculture, working in the planning unit, knowing the people in planning in the ministry, and now working for Sandals, was able to do that matchmaking and ensure that took place. That is something that needs to happen again, but not just for Sandals. There has to be some arrangement. And again, that's why I say the marketing board, because I think that's a function that the marketing board should have, operating independently, but connected to government to collect that intelligence. It could be the extension officers that provide that intelligence to the marketing board. So the marketing board now knows, okay, what in interacting with hotels, what type of production is there? So to say to whoever is the food and beverage manager at Sandals that, look, this is what is available. Whoever is the food and beverage manager at Royalton, this is what is available. These are the farmers. We can guarantee you that the quality of that produce is just as good as anything you're bringing in, and it's fresher. Those are things but they have to be done aggressively. It can't be done passively. I know the St. Lucia Hospitality and Tourism Association, Norani Aziz, was very much involved in this at one point, but I don't know whether they still are. To be honest, like I said, it's a while since I left the ministry. It's a while since I left government, so I don't know what systems are still in place, but I do not think it is that difficult to put these systems in place, particularly now with everything being online. You could go on a farmer's holding, instantly enter from the information the farmer has given you and from what you've been able to truth with your own eyes, and enter that information and say exactly what is available. I'm just saying that the St. Lucia SLHC has no dealings with farmers. That's actually unfortunate, because that was something that they were very much engaged with at one point. I actually have a picture of a meeting at Bay Gardens. At the time, I was Moses Jabatis was Minister of Agriculture. I was there as, I suspect, as Minister of Sustainable Development. And I remember Norani being in that picture and a couple of other people, where we were looking at, again, setting up that contact between agriculture and SLHTA. So it's unfortunate if that has fallen apart, but that is something that has to be revitalized, because that's the only way farming will be lucrative and productive for farmers in St. Lucia. There has to be support given to farmers, and unfortunately, they're not getting that support right now. They're not getting enough of that support at the marketing end right now, and that is critical.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fletcher.
All right, thank you very much. Felita, you can go ahead with your question.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Fletcher.
Good evening.
My name is Felita from St. Lucia.
Hi, Felita.
Yeah, tonight was very interesting. I really liked a lot of points you bring tonight first.
Thank you.
Especially about recycling the water, how we can catch in water, because we have to invest if we have farming. We cannot depend on agriculture all the time, because with me, I work in agriculture for 40 years. And I never depend to look for anything, because if you do your own, it will better until the government will come on with you on the way. I have a 400,000 gallon tank. But the problem is, I live in a plateau. Plateau is a very, very, very hard for water. Because for this year, we did not have water over how many months. But if we don't get rain, did you know whatever I catch in the tank, I'm not able to provide as before. If I was providing like 10 case of thing or 4 case, I would not be able to provide, because we don't get in water for you to put here for the tank, because the tank is connected to my roof. I always believe in that. Sometimes what I do, as you say, recycling. So when I wash dishes, I rinse it in one sink, and I catch in the water, I rinse it in, I put it in bucket. So when I put in bucket, I will able to water the plant. So all these things like that. It's very interesting what you're saying. Is we have to use our common sense. Whatever we can catch, whatever we will able to do, we have to do it as you say. And if government have to give us a little incentive, it is fine. We will just have to do what we have to do, and after whatever they will give us after, we will be able to place it back. And I always believe in that. I always believe in that one. And another thing you mentioned again, Mr. Fletcher, our extension officer. It is very true what you say, because when they come to our farm, they cannot tell us nothing about water. To say, okay, that and that and that, you can put a pad there and make it run from there, and you can get the waste of water and things like that for the plant or whatever. They can't tell you nothing about that. That is really true what you say about this thing. And about the river, when we're talking, a lot of let's say if we, human beings, we don't protect our patrimony. Because I've seen people going by river and they cutting trees. And instead of cutting trees, we're supposed to plant trees, because if we continue to cut the trees, we're not going to, what happens to the river? The river will get dry, because instead we're supposed to plant. Even by the roofing, people destroying it. So all these things is bringing problem to the country. You understand? So a lot of things you said, because I've seen already people going to cut the mangrove to make charcoal. Yes. They didn't have a penalty for that.
There should be. There should be. Nobody should be allowed to cut any mangrove in this country.
Exactly. They've gotten it to make charcoal and all these things. So, Mr. Fletcher, what you bring up tonight, every single point you bring to us, then I think it's a very, very, and I learn a lot. And I've been having, because my grandfather used to teach us all these things, little bits and pieces, because as we saying before, when we were grow up, we did not know water. We used to carry water in the river. Another thing again they do in the river now, Mr. Fletcher, when the people washing the banana thing, they drop in all this whatever diaphane, whatever they call it, they put in the thing. All these things is destroying the water. All these things destroying the water.
Yeah.
All right, but it was a very nice session tonight, Mr. Fletcher. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would there be any more questions?
Just to add to what the last caller said about extension officers and water, there's actually a division in the Ministry of Agriculture that is supposed to give you that kind of advice on water management, how do you, the whole issue of drainage, etc. in your farm, and that's the Agricultural Engineering Division. I'm assuming it still exists, but the Agricultural Engineering Division is supposed to work very closely with the Extension Division to be able to provide, because it's kind of difficult for an extension officer to be a jack of all trades and provide you with expert advice on everything. But what the extension officer is supposed to do is identify the problem and then get the person the specialist within the Ministry of Agriculture to deal with the problem. So if it is that there's a pest and disease problem, there might be some pest and disease problems that the extension officer can diagnose. But if they can't, then there's a research division, there are crop protection officers, there might be a nematologist, there might be somebody who understands, who was trained in insects. So, you know, who can now go on the farm with the extension officer and help to diagnose the problem better and identify what the solution to the problem is. The same way with water and with drains, etc. Somebody from the Agricultural Engineering Division is supposed to be able to accompany the extension officer to the farm if the farmer has a particular problem and help diagnose that problem and solve that problem. So that's how extension works. Extension is the front line, and if there's a problem extension cannot solve, then extension then goes back to the ministry and finds someone who can help the farmer solve the problem. And even do the diagnosis. If it is that you suspect it might be a soil problem, so you take a soil sample and you bring it back to the ministry and you bring it to the research division. There's supposed to be an analytical lab now that the EU funded. That wasn't there in my time, but it's there now. So you're hoping that there are facilities in there that can tell you whether you have a potassium deficiency, what type of deficiency, what does that soil need? Maybe the acidity of the soil, because the soil, because of the fertilizers you've been using, maybe the pH of the soil is wrong. So you need to add some lime. All of these things are things that is the type of technical support that the ministry is supposed to be able to provide to you as a farmer, because you cannot diagnose those problems yourself. And that is where extension comes in, to be able to give you that type of support. If it is working properly, that's how it's supposed to work.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Fletcher. Would there be any more questions? Okay. It doesn't seem so. So as we come to close tonight's session, I would just like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Dr. James Fletcher, for truly this was an incredible, informative, and insightful today session on climate change. Your expertise has provided us with a new level of understanding about this critical issue, and we are truly grateful for the knowledge you have shared, and it inspires us to take more meaningful actions within our own community. So once again, I just want to thank you very much for your invaluable contribution. So thank you so much.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right. Just for a quick update as it relates to our screening. So for those Vincentian members who would like to take part in the screening of our documentary, just please fill out the Google form if you wish to attend, because the seats are very limited and the deadline for the submission is tomorrow. So that message was sent in the WhatsApp chat. So please take a minute to look at it and fill it out if you want to attend that session. And for St. Kitts, just a gentle reminder that if you want to attend, please contact your project coordinator, which is Ms. Latoya Duncan, for further details. And for St. Lucia, The form is also available in the chat. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending tonight's session, and I will see you again next week. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, Dr. Fletcher. Good job.
Good night. Thank you.